Who gets addicted? Most people don't understand why or how other people become addicted to drugs, alcohol, greed, sex, gambling, or any other substance or way of life that completely dominates their existence.
Addiction is doing anything over and over again out of habit that either works or doesn't work for you, but impacts the rest of your life in some way. So when you, especially in adolescence, they have this global view of things. They're very existential. They're thinking about life at the same time that everyone's trying to sort of narrow them down and that they should just focus on X, Y, and Z and get through a period of time.
Just a lot of guilt. I'm ashamed, and I think everybody sees my arms. I feel like everyone sees them everywhere I go. They're always looking, or like, I think people at Dunkin' Donuts even look. I feel like everyone's looking at me. Everybody knows. You know, I'm a good girl. Like, I don't know why I do this to myself. You just become so lost.
The age group from 12 to 22, there's a lot going on in the mind. The brain is just forming. The frontal lobes are suddenly kicking on, and executive functioning and thinking is starting to make a lot of sense. And this is where patterns really form in this age group. So if someone's going through a rough time and they decide to use alternative coping skills that are unhealthy for them in the long run, these are the things that they depend on when they become 25, 35, 45, and 55.
In my opinion, the reason why adolescents choose drugs and alcohol is because when it comes to kids, especially when it comes to the school systems, they don't teach them. They don't teach them, one, who they are, what comes up for you when you're an adolescent, what fear is, what is the emotions behind that. So then they use substances to try to find themselves, try to find that comfort, try to find the peace. Oftentimes, kids don't know where their peace comes from and who they are.
Mistakenly, most people believe that those who use or become addicted lacked moral principles or willpower, and that they could stop their addictive behavior simply by choosing to do so. Not true. In reality, addiction is a progressive, complicated disease that has baffled mankind since grapes were first crushed into wine.
I think people get addicted by just seeing a friend doing it and then their friend saying, oh, come do it, it's cool, or they just think that it's the best thing to do for them and they feel like they shouldn't stop because it's what they want to do.
I think that a lot of kids will experiment with drugs in their time, and sometimes it's like small reasons, like, oh, my friends use, I was curious, things like that. But I think where it gets to addiction is when it's used as a coping mechanism. Think of very young teenagers, think of yourself as a teenager, or think of what you're going through now. And when you go through something truly traumatic, you might not have the resources to deal with it. And I think once you find drugs and realize that that can be a solution or something that will numb the pain, I think that that's when teenagers really turn to it as a coping mechanism when they can't deal with their own lives, or when it gets so much a part of their life and daily usage, then like we see, it goes from things like marijuana to harder drugs and more frequent usage.
People don't understand why addicts start using in the first place, and it's to not feel. I felt less than, and even at school I felt less than. I was in the popular group of girls, but I always felt like that I wasn't important, that I wasn't good enough, something about me was wrong.
Am I a candidate for addiction? There are questions people can ask to gauge whether or not a person has a drug problem. These may not mean that someone is addicted, but answering yes to any of these questions may suggest a developing problem, which could require follow-up with a professional drug treatment specialist. These include: have you ever ridden in a car driving by someone, including yourself, who has been using alcohol or drugs? Do you ever use alcohol or drugs to feel better about yourself? or to fit in. Have you ever used alcohol or drugs when you are alone? Do you ever forget things you did while using alcohol or drugs? Do family or friends ever tell you to cut down on your use of alcohol or drugs? Have you ever gotten into trouble while you were using alcohol or drugs?
Often, it's experienced very differently by the person who's living inside of a drug experience. Very often they're excited and enthusiastic. They feel differently. They often feel more powerful. They feel more creative. They feel like they're getting away with something, so that very often, the teenagers I talk to, they feel like outlaws. They're showing the world. And so they don't think about the risks or the consequences because they're in this mode where they're excited and enjoying the high. They don't see the risk associated with it. Very often, they don't really care, even when they meet a consequence. Even when they hit the wall, as it were, they're not necessarily upset about it.
I don't think if somebody's an alcoholic, I don't think that they necessarily have to be doing drugs. I don't think alcohol has to lead to drugs. I think if you do alcohol and maybe while you're drunk and somebody gives you a drug, then you could get hooked on that from then, and you're like, well, I don't know what I had when I was drunk, but I need more. And then from smoking pot and doing drugs, I think that can lead to some serious consequences. A couple teenagers at my high school were drinking and driving, and they all got in a car accident, and they sadly passed away. But that's just something that you need to know. You need to be careful not to do any of that stuff because it can really change your life just like that.
Addiction is a chronic disease characterized by drug seeking and using drugs that is compulsive or difficult to control despite harmful consequences. The decision to take drugs for the first time is voluntary for most people, but repeated drug use can lead to brain changes that challenge an addicted person's self-control and interfere with their ability to resist intense urges to take drugs.
I got into marijuana I'd say close to a year ago, and I've been smoking pretty consistently ever since I think last September-ish, all the way up until about May 24th-ish, the end of May. I think the only way it could be addictive is by habit. It creates a great feeling for some people, and it's just a really enjoyable thing. So I think the fact that I enjoy it quite a bit makes me want to continue, and made me continue quite a bit. It's just a fun thing to do, and there's a big social aspect to it too. A lot of kids smoke with you as well, and you can just watch movies and do whatever.
It develops habits that you would have never thought that you would have, or that you may never realize that you do have, that you just become dependent upon this stuff.
They have parents who have jobs and that they have kind of a fallback, and they know that their parents won't abandon them. They have less of that motivation because they don't really have that immediate fear that they're going to end up homeless, that they're going to end up in jail. It doesn't seem real to them because they have the support of their family and they have the money to back them up. They might have access to lawyers, and it's not as scary for them because they haven't had to face that reality necessarily as much of a child who grew up from nothing and didn't have that support and has seen people around them end up in jail.
What happens to the brain when a person takes drugs? Most drugs affect the brain's reward circuit by flooding it with dopamine. Dopamine controls the body's ability to feel pleasure and motivates a person to repeat these pleasurable behaviors. This overstimulation of the reward circuit causes the intensely pleasurable high that can lead people to take a drug again and again.
My drug use progressed. Well, at first I was using just marijuana. Then I tried more stuff like cocaine, ecstasy. like in a bunch of other drugs. And like the more I tried, the more I liked them.
I believe that each individual story is different when one starts doing drugs. Some people do it to escape. Some people are fighting depression. Some people are coming off of opiates and painkillers from, say, an accident or an injury, and then they get addicted to street drugs.
As a person continues to use drugs, the brain adjusts to the excess dopamine by making less of it, and or reducing the ability of cells in the reward circuit to respond to it. This reduces the high that a person feels compared to the high they would felt when first taking the drug, an effect known as tolerance. They might take more of the drug, trying to achieve the same dopamine high. It can also cause them to get less pleasure from other things they once enjoyed, like food, companionship, or social interactions with others.
All of us look for a connection. We all want to be loved, we all want to be close to people, even if we just met. And drugs are often like a real nice lubricant to make that happen. You know, and then like when we smoke weed together, you can be close, and you can be your quirky self, you can be your ugly self, you can be your ridiculous self, but you will be accepted. The thing is, of course, what happens if we keep doing that? And we keep really not processing what's underneath. We keep not checking in with that anxious or guilty or really, really sad self. Then eventually we will get rejected by those fun, ridiculous, accepting people. Because they'll see something's off. Then we go to sometimes a harder drug, because again, when we do coke together, we can be complete idiots. We can sobber and slob and be accepted. Of course, the cycle repeats itself. You still carry the sadness, you still carry the guilt, you still carry the anger, and you'll be rejected again. Either that, or because you run out of money and can't buy your friends Coke anymore. So you look for the next, and you look for the next.
There are different paths to addiction. Probably the first drug that a lot of kids have exposure to is nicotine. You know, in spite of all the work that we do to tell people this causes cancer and lung disease and it's going to rot your teeth, and you know, kids see nicotine as a pathway to adulthood, and so they tend to be exposed to it at an early age, and many of them start to use it. And some people believe that nicotine is a gateway drug, that when they start to smoke, it introduces them to the feeling of using drugs, and they start to be less afraid of drugs. You know, alcohol is probably the second drug that most kids get exposure to. And even today, in the midst of this opiate epidemic, we see as many people with an alcohol problem as we do with an opiate problem, because it is so available and so easy to get. So once a kid is smoking cigarettes and drinking alcohol, they're now in a drug culture. And they're going to start to experiment with what's ever coming down the pike. And so because opiates are so available and ubiquitous, it's very likely that they're going to get exposed to Vicodin or Oxy or, you know, one of the other synthetic opiates in the course of their socialization. And because opiates are so much more addicting in many respects, and because they're more likely to have an immediate effect, kids are drawn to them because they feel this intense rush from them.
When teens become bewildered or confused about where they can turn to find relief from life's challenges, and there is no one they feel they can turn to for help, they often turn to drugs or alcohol to find relief from these painful experiences.
I was always using with my friends until I started to get into like Xanax and crack. And like really the only drugs I would use by myself was weed and Xanax. Like every time I would feel anxiety or something, I'd just eat like 2 Xanax bars and just like start doing it all the time. Like, as my mom would say, I was eating it like candy.
So it sounds like you started to kind of self-medicate. You said you started experiencing some anxiety and then you found yourself taking more and more Xanax.
Yeah, because it like really wasn't even a big deal to me when I did take Xanax. I was eating like literally, I could eat as many as I wanted a day because I sold Xanax and like literally was supplying myself with it and like supplying all the dealers around the town with it, and like I was just could eat as many as I wanted to and it wouldn't affect me on any money. Like I was even giving Xanax away to people that were my friends that I was hanging out with and like making them addicts, unfortunately.
Very often the parents are not aware that their children are using drugs. What the parents see is that their kid has become irresponsible. Their grades are suffering. They're no longer hanging out with the kids that they used to hang out with that the parents liked. They may become isolative. They're spending a lot of time in their room, and when they're challenged, they say they're spending their time gaming on the internet or reading, but in fact, they may be getting high and just spacing out.
My first phase, yeah, I was having fun. I loved smoking weed with my friends. It was comfortable. It was just nice to be with my friends and smoke weed. And then it led to me thinking about bigger and so-called better drugs. And that's when things kind of, like I saw things kind of like spiral down because of my grades. Like I was having problems with grades and motivational issues. And then I got to the point where it wasn't like a motivational issue anymore. I had no motivation. I didn't do my schoolwork. If I showed up to class, I wouldn't do my classwork. So it was basically just like I didn't do anything. That was my problem. I would just stop doing sports. I stopped doing school. I stopped doing anything unless it involved me getting high.
I've seen a lot of clients, for them, an addiction to weed, of smoking every day, for them, it leads to a lack of being able to function. They aren't able to do a lot of the things that they used to be able to do. It leads to a lack of interest in things. They quit a lot of the things that they used to do. I've heard a lot of stories of regret about things that they gave up because of their smoking every day, multiple times a day. And so I think although you may not die because of smoking weed every day, for them it was dangerous because it was a slippery slope. They began giving up so many of the things that they loved, and they started experiencing a lot of depression because of smoking every day.
Friends, parents, relatives, teachers all struggle to understand what happened to their loved one when they chose to walk down the painful and destructive road to addiction.
She started dating my nephew like their last year of high school. So I knew her about 10 years. You know, she was a really outgoing, fun, friendly, very well liked person. And I think, you know, just she had some troubles along the way. She got into a car accident and hurt her back, and they started her on some pain medications, and then she had to have another major surgery done, and they gave her like oxycodone at that point. And you know, she just, with the surgeries and stuff, I think the medicine almost gave her like a depressed feeling and the need to take more of it, to the point where she would start doctor hopping and making up ailments that weren't really there just so she could get pain medication. And it really started to impair her life and change who she was dramatically. There would be days when she wasn't high, and she would be like the normal Ashley that we all knew and loved. And, you know, she would be the first person when you walked into a room to come up to you and hug you and how are you doing? And then, you know, you'd never know if you were coming to a family function which Ashley you were gonna get. And it was very obvious within a minute of walking in the door which one was there that day. And, you know, when she was high, her speech was slurred and her eyes were very glossed over, and she would talk about things that wouldn't make any sense, or she would send a text message, none of the words would make any sense at all. And she would get on social media and like rant and rave about things, and like all of her words would be messed up, they wouldn't make any sense. And it was just really sad to watch her over time. She came from a family, she had both her parents were together her whole life, and she had an older sister, and really had everything going for her when she graduated high school. And then with the accident happening, it just like put her into a whole new spiral of life, and she was just so dependent upon those drugs.
My grandmother got addicted to crack, and at that time my mom was then raised by my great-grandmother, and so from ages 3 to 15 my grandmother was in and out of jail, going back and forth because of crack. And when she finally got to see her again, it was kind of like different, because after all of that had happened, it's like you lost the connection.
So over the about 13 years that she was absent, I was forced to like form dependent relationships on other people, my grandmother, aunts, and even when my mother came around, because it was in and out, and you could tell she was still using, and she had other kids during her addiction. So it's like as I got older, I understood the situation a little better, and it didn't make me accepting of it. I just, accepted the fact that this is the mother I have, and it's not like all the other mothers I see around me. So as an adult, she and I don't really have a relationship, and I can tell, like, even as an adult, even though she's gone through her addiction, she's sober and so forth, she still isn't accountable for the damage that she caused years ago. And I think that that's a big lesson that people need to understand, is that just like my daughter said earlier, like that it affects you. Your use of drugs affects everybody around you, and even though a person comes through their addiction, it's not like other people don't come through it with them, and you have to be accountable for how you made others feel or what you did to others in your addiction.
It affects everyone. It affects the family. Sometimes it even affects your friends if they know that you're doing it. It affects everyone that you know, because they know that you're on it, and they like feel sad for you, and they don't really know what to do besides take you to rehab. And if that doesn't stop, they don't really know how to control it.
People begin to judge and blame themselves and think that they caused the addictive behavior or did something to make their loved one addicted to substances. In fact, addiction is a self-motivated psychological and physical problem, and recovery is also a self-motivated journey.
Often asked, how do I know if my kid is addicted, and what is addiction? And there are different definitions of addiction. The American Society of Addiction Medicine recently came up with a definition that was very different than the definitions that they had offered in the past. The definition that ASAM offered said that addiction is a disorder of the brain's reward circuitry and related brain regions. What's so striking about this definition is that it doesn't say anything about drugs. It implies that other reward-seeking behaviors, like compulsive sexual activity and gambling, and in some cases shopping, may be just as capable of causing an addiction as drugs can.
People don't necessarily fully understand is that for a lot of people, mental health and addiction can't really be extricated from one another. They can't. They're very intertwined. And for a lot of people, I think that this substance use and substance abuse starts out as a result because of some mental health problems, because of depression or because of anxiety or anything like that. And so, addiction isn't just substances. It's also, self-harm, and it's also eating, and it's also a lot of other things. And it's a means of coping with what's going on in their life, whether it's family issues, whether it's this emotional distress. And I think for a lot of times people don't understand that there's a need to get to the root of the problem. It's not just about cutting out these substances or cutting out these bad behaviors. It's about figuring out what's really going on.
It's important to know that an addiction doesn't mean you're a bad kid. It just means that instead of dealing with the reality of the world, the escape into a mind-altering world is a more comfortable and seemingly a safe mental place. Here is a list of the 14 most common paths to addiction. 1. The family itself is involved in drugs or alcohol. 2. My friends are using or the neighborhood is drug infested. 3. The addiction gene is passed on. 4. The desire to belong, to be accepted, and to be popular. 5. Feeling lonely or depressed, anything to take the pain away. 6. Experimentation that turns into addiction. 7. Trauma. 8. Boredom. 9. Low self-esteem. 10. Glamorized, the cool, hip thing to do. 11. The only way to party. Fame and/or fortune will give immunity from addiction. 12. Weight reducer or energizer to keep up with challenges. 13. Prescription medication turns into dependency. 14. Expectations and/or pressure from family to adhere to social status performance. Teen dependency and addiction doesn't discriminate. It affects teens no matter what their skin color, social family status, IQ, or religion. This is because the underlying reasons that influence the choices are the same. Can drug addiction be cured or prevented? As with most other chronic diseases, treatment for drug addiction generally isn't a cure. However, addiction is treatable and can be successfully managed. People who are recovering from an addiction will be at risk for relapse for years and possibly their whole lives.
You know, when I was in high school, I wanted to fit in. You know, I was curious too. Like, just the idea of being out of myself excited me because I wanted to experience something different. And the scary part is once I tried that and once I put that in my body, I lost control. And that's what separates me from some other people, is that I can't control it. And the scary thing is if you haven't tried it, you don't know if you can either. And you know, since I was 17, I've buried over 30 friends from the disease of addiction. And I don't think, you know, dying at 19, at 22, 25 was part of their plan either.
When you're in high school, you watch a million of these anti-drug, anti-depression documentaries, and everyone always tells you to get help, and you roll your eyes and you're like, oh, whatever, they don't know what they're talking about. But I think what no one really understands is that if you're going through depression or you're going through anxiety, it's only going to get worse if you don't talk about it, right? And the other thing you have to understand is that no one's going to judge you if you talk about it, because a lot of people struggle with depression, and a lot of people struggle with anxiety, and a lot of people struggle with substance abuse, and it's not something that you're going to be judged for. And at the end of the day, your health is more important than what other people think of you, you know? And I think that if you don't seek out that help, you could end up in very dark places. I know I was in a really dark place because I didn't seek out that help, you know? I didn't seek out that help for so long that I was, laying in bed for the majority of the day. I didn't even want to go to school. So I think that, you can really tell anyone. You can tell your best friend, you can tell a teacher, you can tell a therapist, but you need to talk to someone, or else you're gonna have a really hard time getting better and kind of going the places you want to go in life.